Let's come back to understanding what we're doing and why and how. Revolutions do not work. Reformations do not work. There are counter-revolutions endemically because it's a part of the structure. There are counter-reformations for the exact same reason. When you're dealing with a mirror mind, you're going to get reflections. Because it's the mirror mind that makes those reflections, because that's the way it thinks it sees. Most holy events require, regardless of what religion, sect, etc., sectless, religionless, for those who are going to do this to purify themselves before doing it. And to not be so overly concerned with purifying the ritual ahead of time. That if you are prepared in the sense that you are open, because that's the only purification there is, what you actually do then is holy. It's true in nature, it's true in consciousness. It's very true in nature, it's high truth in consciousness. We're looking at currently how at this juncture of 2014 in the 21st century, a great culminating excellence is occurring everywhere on the planet. And we're looking at one of the, not the slices of the pie, not the wedges of the culture or the civilization, but taking as a springboard for ourselves today, here returning after the first half on the tremendous influence that India had on the German language people, especially of the First World War, the between wars, the Three Penny Opera by Kurt Weill, etc., Metropolis, Franz Lang, the Second World War, the atomic bomb age, etc., even until now, that India itself, the mathematical term would be recursion, the recursive quality that it not only affects those people, but those who affect those people are also affected. There's a quality in geology where the intrusion into a matrix, feldspar, whatever it is, changes the way in which the geology of that strata will be, but it also changes the chemical composition, the atomic structure of the infusion itself. And so you get rare minerals, rare alloys that are possible. And they traditionally in wisdom are alive, just like plants and animals and men. Minerals are alive. Metals are alive in just that way. To not know this is to believe in dead matter. There's no such thing as dead matter. What time do you think it is that there could be dead matter? Even in the most perfect vacuum of intergalactic space, there are atoms of gas, subatomic particles, photons, neutrinos, etc. It's a blizzard of happening. The only thing dead is the zombies who do not know this, who do not see this, who do not hear this, who do not live this. They are dead. It's time to stop obeying the false magicians who want us to cut the dead seeming down from their being hung in the cemeteries and brought so that they can be alleviated and freed from the cemetery, from those things, and given these secret riddles that if they can't respond, won't respond especially, their head will explode. Let's look at India, as we're doing. Usually with the notes that are brought into play, there is a series of illustrations that I bring into play. And 3 of these illustrations are of an Indian woman. Her name was Vimala Thakar. She was born in 1921, about the time that Hermann Hesse was writing Siddhartha and publishing it. And she died in 2009, just less than a handful of years ago. She was a black woman. There are black women in Africa by the hundreds of millions. There are black women in India by the hundreds of millions. There are black women in Australia, in New Guinea, in many parts of the world, the Caribbean, the United States, etc., Europe, etc. About 1 billion black women in humanity. Vimla was an extraordinary youngster. She was born in the middle of the great Deccan desert that is a part of the middle of India. And she went to Nagpur University. Nagpur is a very big, traditional, ancient, powerful city of the Deccan. My teacher of the Bhagavad Gita to me personally was from Nagpur. He was a soil agronomist, a soil engineer, Mr. Sudarshan Puri. I was 20 years old. He got me to read Heinrich Zimmer's Philosophies of India. After I had read the Bhagavad Gita, after I had heard from him the Bhagavad Gita, so I knew how to learn, to begin. She matured out of Nagpur University by joining with Vinoba Bhave, the successor to Gandhi. And when she had worked with the social philosophy called in India, in Sanskrit, Sarvodaya. Sarvodaya is the service of all, a social ordering that is not communist, it's not capitalist, it's a third power. And she worked for decades with Vinoba, and we'll talk more about it. She has a bunch of little books that come out, maybe several dozens, scores. Here's some poems. Friendly Communion. But she's especially famous for little books beyond awareness. Because in addition to having the communal work of Sarvodaya with Vinoba for many, many years, she chanced upon a lecture in India by Krishnamurti. So when she realized that there is a waking that gives a fertility and a fructification to all of the social philosophy, that raises it so that it now becomes something more than just universal good works. She joined the Krishnamurti way of traveling the world and all over India for the rest of her life. She lived to be 88 years old. And if you look up Vimla Thakar, you're likely to come across a picture of her looking beautiful in what used to be called an angelic sort of way, deep, wise woman. And it reads underneath, the Indian spiritual master Vimla Thakar, in India she's called Vimalaji, J-I-G as respect, Gandhi, Gandhiji, Vinoba, Vinobi, Baji. The Indian spiritual master Vimla Thakar, whom we featured in our fall-winter 1996 issue of the magazine What is Enlightenment, is best known in Europe and the US as a strikingly independent and powerful teacher of spiritual awakening. Indeed, we at What is Enlightenment believe that she is perhaps the most enlightened woman in the world today. She came by invitation to the Los Angeles area in the 1970s. She went to Claremont colleges in Pomona and addressed many people there. Her books include this one. Its title is Silence in Action. From Intellect to Intelligence. Just simply talks. Blossoms of Friendship. And a very, very great book. Its title is Life as Yoga. I used to use the term for my learning as the yoga of civilization, a Maharaja yoga, which it is. Because it has its heritage, lineage, if you like, to begin. But heritage is more comprehensive than a lineage. Going back before there was a written language, when wisdom was a spoken language, that one would go, and the saying becomes proverbial, one would sit at the feet those hearable words and language, when written down, are called Upanishads. Shad, sat, means seat, set. Upani, at the feet of, in an open way. When one is there, what occurs is a quality that is best in the English word expressed as beholding. In birth, as in love, there are knees that hold. In wisdom, there are knees in which beholding occurs, because it is shareable. Not only those beholding, but whoever is being beheld is also beholding at the same time, and there is a sharedness. And that sharedness is beholding raised to its radiance, which is presence. In the ancient biblical heritage, very early on it was called the angel of the presence. There comes a day where all present themselves before God. And the interface between those presenting themselves and God is the angel of the presence. Not a director, not an interlocutor. A facilitator with a big neon sign, facilitator. That the sharedness of beholding and beholder means that not only are we in the presence, but God is in presence also. There is a simultaneousness which has no time, and thus it is before spontaneity comes into play as time, and then time comes into play as blossoming as space, and space-time blossoms into particality. Out of the energy wave comes the integral of the particality, and the whole integral universe occurs in this dance. There is a deep resonance called harmonic, which is able to have a two-handed prayer, a gasho, an openness. That is the most ancient asana for it. That is the beholding raised to a sharing, creating presence. There, the language that comes out is a poetic, spontaneously a poetic. So that when civilization ever reached a node of an apex of excellence, emerging qualities that had come to that particular mounded axial eminence, there you will find a poetic that is capable of being written and read in civilization. And it's feminine. The first exemplar of that. 4,350 years ago was Enheduanna, the end priestess in the great Sumerian city of Ur, under her father as the king, Sargon, establishing Akkad as being the transform of ancient Sumeria into Akkadia. And the language of Akkadia is the subject of another wise woman's recent book, Malati Shenge, who also is from the Deccan in southern India, and among her books, The Language of the Harappans, ancient Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, the original Indus civilization, from Akkadian to Sanskrit. And her books are almost not read at all, and yet there is a beautiful quality of harmonic. Just like Vimala Thakar, there are qualities to Melita's beautiful presenting, and she has another book we've talked about before, The Civilized Demons, Harappans in the Rig Veda. That somehow there was an Aryan invasion of ancient black-skinned India, and these white Aryan invaders reorganized these black Dravidians so that they now fit into a new master plan, the caste system, the Varnas. And at the top will be the Brahmins, who study all of what is left there for there to be studied, and who oversee the ceremonies that fructify and fortify the studying. And all of this is policed by the Kshatriyas, the warriors. In ancient Sanskrit, they're called Maruts. Indra, the chief thunder god like Zeus, has as his cohorts the Maruts, the warriors, the Kshatriyas, whose gleaming bronze spears and bronze helmets, shields, gold-encased armors, harnesses to their horses in tandem on their chariots, like a early civilized panzer division. Unstoppable. All this is a fiction. It did not happen that way at all. The black Indians, the Dravidians, were enormously civilized. Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa were cities of hundreds of thousands of people at the time that the Great Pyramids were being built in Egypt. There were no cities anywhere in the world that large. And not just that pair, like a New York, Los Angeles, but there were about 100 other Indus civilization, small cities up to medium-sized cities, and then these two huge metropolitan areas. They reached an apex of their capacities 1,000 years before the so-called 1500 BC Aryan so-called invasion. The original language of Sanskrit which was also the original language of Old Irani, was Avesta. And the Avestan word Arya meant noble, those who are noble. And that quality of written language first occurred in Zarathustra's Gathas, about 1900 BC, about the same time that Abraham was getting the vision of leaving the ancient grounds, not just Ur, but where his father Terah had moved them to Haran in northern, what is today Iraq, near the Turkey border, and in what really is Kurdish lands. The large city for Kurds is Diyarbakir in Turkey, but not allowed to be Kurdish. Just like the Kurds in Iran are not allowed to be Kurds, the Kurds in Iraq are not allowed to be Kurds. That's where Abraham grew into maturity, not in Ur, but in Haran, and had the vision of the promised land there about the same time that Zarathustra was writing the Gathas. And in the Gathas, Arya in Avestan means noble. In particular, it is the noble men and women who are the angels of the presence. The phrase that comes down and becomes typical because it is a masculine phrase of order. The man of light. The man of light embodies the divine and speaks only in a very high dharma, poetic, who cannot be heard by the men of action, the ones who get things done, the ones who control the getting of things done. So that the interface threshold are the Arya, the men and women who are the noble companions, the noble friends. They're friends in the language of someone like a Vimala, the Sakar. They are the quality of the blossoms of friendship that come into play. They are not the warriors. They're not the Arya. And they don't invade. Like an angel of the presence, they are a openness. And it's the openness that is the conduit between the man of light and the men of action. Between someone who is divinely present in their presence and the world of doing to see that this occurs, that this happens. And the interface is this communion of friendship. The first people in the United States, and what is glibly called America still, because the United States is much broader than America, than the Americas even. The first men and women to understand this high Dharma quality of friendship are called the Transcendentalists. Yeah. Emerson and Thoreau, Bronson Alcott, Orestes Bronson, Nathaniel Hawthorne, but especially the women, Margaret Fuller, Louisa May Alcott, and many of them, the quality that was there. Emerson's Aunt Lydia was the influence on him far beyond any masculine influence. Mary Moody Emerson was fantastically brilliant. It is the friendship of the transcendentalists that gave them the quality of being an interface between the original visioning of what the United States was going to be in the future, not established by the Revolutionary War, not codified by the Constitution, envisioned first by a proverbial man of light, Benjamin Franklin, who proverbially was the first to be able to put a hand out and, as the French used to say in their language, snatch lightning from the sky and use it to put out the torches and to shatter the scepters of those in power who think that they control. When Lord Clark made his Civilization series, it was a smash hit in 1969, after 3 years of preparation. He got permission from a new head of programming at the BBC in London, young then, David Attenborough, whose brother Richard Attenborough, a very famous actor, and became a great director because he directed the great epic film Gandhi, among other things. But David was the one who was interested in expanding the humanity of television, and he commissioned the 13-part series on civilization by Lord Clark, of Civilization, a Personal View of Lord Clark. And it was magnificent. I remember when I was hired to go to Canada in the spring of 1970, they were oil-rich, the white sheiks of Western Canada and Alberta, Calgary. Calgary, the home of the head office of 400 different oil companies. It was like the Dubai of its day. They gave me a budget of $90,000 a year to design an interdisciplinary series of programs. And my beginning budget in 1970 was $90,000 just to buy things and refurbish things, travel, and so forth. The first thing I did is I bought the Civilization series that was still on reels, 13 reels. It was $6,000 in 1970 money. It was a lot of money. All kinds of poo-pooing from the faculty saying, here's the San Francisco hotshot spending our Canadian money like it was water, like some drunk sailor. And I said, wait till you come to the party before you criticize. And within a couple of months after they had seen it, they began showing sections of Civilization to all their courses, and everyone said, well, it was lucky guess, wasn't it? Yeah. When it comes to the apex of discussion of the American genius, he waxes fondly on some of the origins in France of Voltaire. It goes on for long minutes, 20 minutes on Voltaire, and how he went to Ferney on the border of France and Switzerland so that if anybody came to arrest him, he could walk over the border. He never once mentions the woman who owned Ferney, whose house it was, Madame de Châtelet. And that the 12 or 20 years that Voltaire spent with Madame de Châtelet, she was translating Newton into French, and so brought Voltaire out of his masculine arrogance that he was able to write Candide about Leibniz, the competitor to Newton. Leibniz and Candide, and made Voltaire a household word, and almost nobody here now knows that it was Madame de Châtelet who was the wise woman. Then he goes into Thomas Jefferson. Monticello, yes, his architecture is like Palladio in my favorite country, Italy, because the church is in Italy, in Rome, the Vatican, and all of these things. He never once mentions Benjamin Franklin. What, you think that Benjamin Franklin is dating Madame de Châtelet and that there's somehow a hanky-panky going on here? Civilization? Stay tuned because the revisions are going to be huge. More next week.